Today we're talking about how to write the AP Government FRQ. Alright, so the format of the AP test for the FRQ is that you're going to have 4 FRQ questions and you're going to have 1 hour and 40 minutes to answer them. So that means you want to dedicate about 20 minutes to each question. And the FRQ part of the AP exam ends up being about 50% of your raw score.
So there are a couple different types of prompts. There are identify/define prompts, which are shorter and simpler, and the answers should be between 1 to 3 sentences. There are describe/explain prompts, which are more in-depth and have real-world applications, and they should be from 3 to 6 sentences. And there are standard content questions, which are a question based on prior knowledge. There are also resource-based questions, where there's a graph or a picture that relates to the question. And these are guidelines, not rules, so it's pretty flexible.
And you want to answer each question with a total length of about 1 to 6 sentences. And the first part of the question is usually a direct and short answer to the prompt, and you want to keep it really simple and concise. And the second part, you expand on with more supporting evidence, and you want to bring something up that you've already learned in Gov, usually like historical evidence or a modern-day real-world example. And definitely include a reference to the graphic or resource if they've given you one. And you may, if you have time, want to include a conclusion, but it's not always necessary when answering the prompt. So this one, you can look at how the wording in this question dictates how you want to answer it. For example, the first part C use the word explain, so you know that this is going to be, these examples are going to be a bit shorter than part B, where you're describing the rule of the following things. And also, when you're answering a GovFRQ, you want to be sure to directly address anything that it asks you to bring up in the question. Like in part A, you definitely want to directly reference media and elections. And now here's an example of a bad response that someone had put to part A of this FRQ. And if you're reading through it, you can see that this person didn't really accurately address the question. They didn't explain how media and elections, even though they mentioned media and elections, really influence the policy agenda and why they do these things.
Yeah, saying, okay. And so here's another example of a bad response. So again, if you read through this, the person did not elaborate on what congressional committees actually do. They say a lot of circuitous things that don't actually address directly the role of congressional committees, which is kind of a waste of time for the readers and just doesn't give them any information. This is not a good way to answer an FRQ. This is another bad response. The importance of bureaucratic discretion and issue networks, nor iron triangles, is in the implementation of public policy is actually adequately explained. It's kind of just whoever wrote this response just wrote things that have little meaning to kind of get around the answer. There's no actual direct answer or explanation as to why these things are important.
And here's an example of a good response to this question. And if you're looking through this question, this person really directly addresses all the points that were made in this. They mention media and elections, and then they also mention how policy making is directly influenced by these things. And so there, you can see that the response, it's not too elaborate. It's very concise. It's really the ideal of what you're looking for when you're trying to write your AP Government FRQ. And then here's another example of a good response, but for part B. And you can again see that this person, they didn't spend too much time on this question, but they clearly addressed all the points in the question. You can see in their wording, it's not too flowery or elaborate. It just answers the question and it answers it well.
Yeah. So the described committees
congressional committees directly, and described what committee leaders have the power to do. They just directly answered why congressional committees are important and what they do, as opposed to the bad responses, which would say things like congressional committees are important or they are key to whatever, which don't really answer the actual question directly. So here's another example of a good response, but for Part C, which describes bureaucratic discretion and iron triangles and their importance. And so this gets all the points because they explain the importance of bureaucratic discretion in the implementation of public policy very directly by saying that bureaucratic leaders can interpret laws passed by Congress with a good amount of leniency, which changes implementation of public policy. That's a direct answer to the question that very clearly describes the roles of bureaucratic leaders and describes the importance of bureaucratic discretion. And they also explain the importance of iron triangles in the implementation of public policy, just as concisely, describing the connection between the three groups of the iron triangles clearly and concisely. So that's it. I hope you had a... So yeah, we have a homework activity for you, and it's just a practice FRQ that you can do or outline and try to answer as concisely as some of these sample responses did. So yeah, I hope you feel more prepared for the FRQ in the actual exam.